Okay. So today is Devashish's birthday, and we thought we'll wish him, the entire auditorium will wish him. So can we sing happy birthday to him, guys? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Devashish. Happy birthday to you. I think that's a good note to start your session.
Yeah,
Happy birthday, man.
that was unexpected. We
One
should
year,
make it birth, life, and death.
1 year deeper into life, 1 year closer to death. But it's quite we were just talking about this, it's quite a heavy topic to discuss. But at the same time, I feel like poetry is one of the few mediums where you can engage with these topics so openly and
Yeah, you know
freely.
what? One person finds heavy, another finds. There's something Tom Wolfe calls gamboling in the deep.
Right.
It's you're in the deep, but I think poetry allows us to access the deep and the heavy in not lighter, but in slightly personal and accessible ways, which most other mediums don't, because you're working in some structured manner in most other mediums.
Correct, because if you were to write a piece of fiction, for example, everyone always wonders, is it autobiographical? Who are the characters? Is this inspired by real life? In a play, you need to put together sort of performers, and there's a whole process there, and there's mechanisms. In a song, you need a musical talent, which at least I don't. I'm not sure about you. But then the beauty of poetry is you can really express sort of things that are often unspoken, unsaid, deep and dark, and sort of recover those memories, right?
And more often than not, with other mediums, people are expecting, people, I mean, all of us, I include myself in the audience, you're expecting something, and then what you're reading or watching or hearing can, belie that expectation or surprise you. But poetry, you enter with no expectations. So we have the freedom to just go in there and be ourselves because no one's expecting anything of us. Hence, life and death. I think sometimes you can straddle an entire life in 3 lines.
Absolutely. I had a similar dilemma when my grandfather passed away a couple of years ago. And I was thinking of ways in which I could sort of somehow preserve his memory, but also unpack and recover sort of what his life meant to me, but also what it was at death. And I sort of played around a lot with words and ideas, and I realized a ghazal, an English ghazal in the style of Aga Shahid Ali, might be one of the best ways to approach it. And if I may, I thought I would read that for you. It's called Ghazal 24, On the Ground, for my grandfather. Nana peddled kerchiefs of starched thread on the ground. Sauntering, he drank from the sky and fed on the ground. His hanky stuffed the pockets of runny-nosed Parsis and those big-bellied boors that spat red on the ground. The day Kismet chose him to journey across the gulf, knotted hands behind his back, he tread on the ground. When it rained grains of rice, Bilal pervaded puddles. We rolled round the bleating goat, half dead, on the ground. Mothballed memories ripen like papayas. His whiskers whisper. His zabiba darkened with every forehead on the ground. Hamlet on his lips. He gives wisdom to who he wills. Chai cools in a saucer, his newspaper half read on the ground. How could you forget Aflatun? Before it was your pocket square. It was his white cotton rumal spread on the ground.
You call yourself Aflatun. Just a little bit about that. Because I'm just curious, he's a poet in English, but he brings a certain Urdu poetry ethos to his English poetry.
I do write in Urdu as well, but I feel like, as is the tradition with ghazals, you must have a takallus. And I sort of had the idea at the back of my head that, what could this takallus be? And I spent many years just with an open mind thinking of words to play around with. And then I stumbled across Aflatun, which is the sort of Persian and Arabic name for Plato. But it also means sort of a pompous asshole in code terms. So it was a funny pun to me. But the third and the real reason why I really like that word and I think it's very beautiful is because my favorite sweet growing up is a sweet that's from a very specific neighborhood in Bombay at this sweet shop called Suleiman Usman Mithaiwala. If you're in the city, please check it out. And they do this very dense, sugary milk cake called Aflatun. And I felt that there was a certain poignancy to its tying my family roots, my childhood, and the sort of intellectualism or pseudo-intellectualism I try to bring to my poetry.
So dense, sugary milk cake and dense, profound poetry. There's, the density is in common.
Absolutely.
No, why I was interested in your pen name is because, like when I lost my father, I wrote a poem. I think like most poets do when we suffer some kind of loss. And I really struggled trying to, I don't know the right words for it, I might sound very abstract or ambiguous, but I tried to remove myself from the poem to be able to access that loss, to be able to write the poem. So to sort of personify yourself in the poem, it feels like something I wouldn't be able to do.
That removal is difficult. There's a very good Japanese nature, collection of Japanese poetry style called death poetry, right? And there's this Zen poet from the 1700s called Toko, who has this haiku that goes, death poetry is delusion, death is death. And I feel like in many ways, this active removal from of the poet from death and dealing with death as it stands is quite difficult, but it's really what brings the magic in, I feel like.
So I'll read that poem.
Of course.
And quite literally, it's called Fathers. But it also says below that in brackets, for dad. So I was struggling clearly, trying to remove myself from the poem and not being able to. They wait on scooters at right angles to the sun, measuring the slowness of the summer heat against the rapidly approaching bright future they wish upon their sons. They spend sparse holidays folding old newspapers into paper boats, assuring their adventurous little boys that love, when shaped this way, does not capsize. They steal money put aside by mothers for potatoes and rice. Those comics may not fill the stomach, but fathers seem to know that it's the heart that needs filling. Stomachs can be trained to adjust. And when their little boy squats like a bird, turned to the window light, hungrily pecking at that comic, his little heart skipping like a flat pebble across the water of his childhood, his father watches. His heart full now, hoping this could stay exactly this way forever, but knowing it will not be so. He turns, walks away, measuring the slowness of his stride against the rapidly approaching shadows of eventuality.
That was really moving. Thank you for sharing that poem. I feel like it captures the sort of realization that many people have in their lives, and especially I think many poets, this idea of the sort of memento mori, the notion that death isn't something that you run away from or try to delay inevitably, but the realization that there is sort of a tragic, or not tragic, just an end that appears at some point in your life means that every moment you live should be one that you live to the fullest. And I feel like you capture that very well.
I mean, I'll quote a cliche, but it's the only assurance life gives you that it will end. And somewhere, as poets, because we are working, again, I'll quote a cliche, we are working in isolation and stillness. We are, I think, at least mentally and psychologically closer to death and the idea of our death and the striking nature of our mortality more than others.
But there's always been a metaphor, or like just a use of words in this idea of death that's I've always found a bit confusing, which is that it is sort of a stillness and an end. Because in many ways, if you revisit sort of any great fable or most religious scripture, death is always seen as a journey, right? There's always stages to it, there's steps to it, there's rivers involved, there's boats involved, there's sort of stairways. And in many ways, there's a sort of motif of movement that comes out in death. And I worked in a piece, it's currently unpublished, but it's something I've been thinking a lot through about sort of what movements to experience in this idea of both death, but also maybe rebirth or post-death. And I have this poem that I call Backpacker on the Day of Judgment that tries to sort of use some of these ideas and unpack it. And if I may, I would like to read it. It goes something like this. He died as he lived, thumb raised, a continent swaying on his backpack, dust-caked boots dangling like unpaid dues. He was hitchhiking to heaven, outrunning sunsets, living off gas station bread and half-learned tongues. But arrival felt wrong. It was a border with no crossing, customs with no country, death with no life. Others rushed past him, families in minivans, clerics in tinted limos, bodhisattvas in matching tracksuits, a pharaoh in a Rolls-Royce Wraith, gliding lane to lane. His kidneys were pickled in a jar, with no need for toilet breaks. The highway was a neon neverland. Billboards blinked promises. All faiths welcome. Karma clearance, instant moksha. Deals with the devil half off. At immigration, Anubis barely glanced up. The scale, it seemed, was out of order. Do you lead others astray? Not willingly, said the traveler. The jackal just shrugged and waved him through. The lounge, it seemed, was reserved for those with tithes and tokens and elite status. He pressed his face to the glass and watched a pianist knee-deep in requiem, a butler serving mini ambrosias, a concierge counseling a hedge fund hafiz on his next incarnation. Purgatory, it appeared, was just like a long layover. Like that at Delhi Terminal 3, when a flight, like that night the monsoon grounded every flight and no one had anywhere to go. He liked it, in the way you like a cancelled train in a foreign station. No destination, no refund, just weather and strangers sharing a bench with nowhere to be. And at last, he reached the gate. But no choir broke into song, no pearly gates swung wide, no angels staffed the desk. Beyond, signs glowed in every mortal tongue. Styx, Sanzu, Vaitarana, Hithfun. But what's in a name when it's all just water? The speakers above crackled. Final boarding. Priority will be given to business class believers, premium economy profits, mothers with small children, and those who read the terms of service. All others, please remain seated. We thank you for your patience in the eternal economy of grace. And then all was silent. Just a backpacker on a bench, on a layover, in the quiet, by the river. It's a good thing he always packed that pair of swim trunks. Thank you.
Yeah, the journey. It's always a journey in some form or the other. Does that help us come to terms with it? That it's a journey? Because we are always scared of something ending. So if it's a journey, then it seems like there will be something at the end of that, and things will carry on, even though we don't understand what that is.
I think it's even less about physical movement. I just think we're scared of boredom. I feel like sort of our most tragic fear is just being bored perpetually, right? I mean, think of how people describe long office jobs. It's like the end of the world. Think of how people describe sort of, I was stuck with no books or internet and no good conversation for 3 months. I feel like I'm dying, right? I feel like it's the same way. We feel like death is just going to be really boring. And we come up with these very elaborate demigods to explain death. And maybe they're true, I'm not really sure. But I would rather live in a world where death seems enjoyable and fun and maybe something to look forward to. I recently watched this opera, it was a French adaptation of Faust. And it was really funny because very much like the French, it was lots of lovely music and dance. And it's supposed to be a moral tale about sort of do good deeds and end up in heaven and save your soul. But hell looked like really good fun. There were these dance performances, the devil was in a suit. I felt like either way, it seemed like a good end. So in many ways, I think boredom is really what's driving us here.
That's so profound that I want to end this session on that note, but we can't. We have time. So, because you said boredom, and I'd never seen this next poem as that, but perhaps it is. When I finish it, I think we'll segue back to this idea of boredom. It's blown my mind. So it's, again, I don't know why, but there are lots of poems in this book, but there are just 2 poems for my father, and I don't know why I feel like reading them both out. This is the other poem. So my father was a seller of saris all his life, but he didn't want to be one. And so the sari shop, just like most things in Calcutta, decayed after 57 years of him trying to sell saris. So it's called the Sari Emporium. Saris. Memories of marriage bunched into their folds. Red, blue, purple, gold, heavy with memories. Dancing paisley flames around their borders, saris. Shuffled silk conversations sealed into their creases, silent, flattened, crisp, embroidered whispers shimmying through chiffon, Unseen fish in a pond of weaves, saris. 6-yard streams arrested mid-flow around the changing curves of the women in the mirror. Petite women, statesque women, women with daughters, women in love, cotton women, voile women, silk women, women that stared at the mirror and those that stole glances at it, saris. On shelves, folded, unfolded, flooding the counters, uncontrollable long tongues of fabric, stoking the narcissistic desires of women. Women in bindis, blouses, petticoats, and saris, rippling over their hands, sliding across their breasts, tightening protectively about their waists, saris. This shop was once full of them, alive. Saris on hangers, saris wrapped on mannequins, saris in piles of slinky rubia, saris, saris, saris in the mirror, saris on the floor, saris on saris, saris on women, women in saris. Now there's that mirror, and it tells me that I forgot to shave this morning. I wonder who knocked the heads off mannequins. I could do with another face around here. It was in some way the death of the familiar for my father. And when it was a shop that was on rent. So when he was tossed out of it, it started his dementia, which became Alzheimer's, and then we lost him. So it's boredom. Yeah, I never saw it that way, but suddenly now I'm seeing that he was looking for meaning, because meaning is fun. Meaning makes you wake up in the morning. But without that, the boredom is death.
Absolutely, and I feel like there's just something about that poem I love, because you never think of the sari in a very negative sense, right? It's always seen as a positive piece of clothing. In among sort of sartorial choices, you wear saris on special occasions, you wear saris on weddings. To think of it in the context of death is always, especially in your poem, has always really, really made me think. And there's something about, I like your ending, because it transitions from what is in many ways observational writing and writing that's fairly voyeur-like, in fact. But towards the end, you transition to a very visceral realization, which is these mannequins without heads. And do you mind unpacking that for a bit?
Yeah, I didn't realize it when I wrote it, but a few years after I wrote this poem, because I'd left my father alone in Calcutta when I moved to Bombay, and he was recurring in my work. And when I read some bits, like I never read him this poem, because he didn't really, he wasn't he didn't have a poetic bent. But when I told him about things I was writing about him, he said, I didn't know you were watching me. I didn't know you observed. I didn't know that you noticed. So somewhere then it occurred to me that the mannequin and the missing face was that, there is that observational style, yes, it's the man in the shop observing everything, but there's no one observing him, and that's his tragedy.
And that's something that really sticks with me, right? Who is observing whom, and who is recording these lives and these deaths? Because millions are born every year, millions die every year. It's a question of who these people are and who is remembered and who is forgotten, right? I read this very moving Washington Post article around last year that was about this young boy called Khalid Judeh, who he lived in Gaza and Palestine, and while he slept, an airstrike hit his home and killed with it his elder brother, his mother, his father, I think his grandfather, and 60 other members of his family. Khalid and his younger brother, Tamer, survived, but only for a very short, tragic, terror-filled week, when the house that they were taking refuge in was also struck, and he was killed. And when he was killed, he was 9 years old, and Tamer was 8. And there was this very beautiful description of their lives, in very tragic words, that the Washington Post covered. It inspired me to sort of, in some ways, try, in whatever small way I could, to put these names down on paper and hope that we remember them and the many others like them. And I was grateful that Rattle would go on to publish the piece, and then a few other publications. And again, I thought the ghazal was a very good way to capture this feeling, because I feel like at the heart of every ghazal is longing, and is some sense of exile, right? It's either exile from the beloved. The beloved could be romantic, it could be spiritual, or it's exile from home, right? In the sense that Shahid Ali, for example, was torn from Srinagar, or Khalid from Delhi. It's a ghazal titled Like This. And the fragments in this poem you might recognize, which I've borrowed from Bukowski, from Rumi, from Mahmoud Darwish, and from Gopal Krishna Adiga. Only grass is hurt when two bulls lock horns like this. Even the sun was ashamed. Were we born like this? Galilee drowns in tears, swallowing aid into the abyss. Ashes fall like snowflakes, her scarf adorned like this. Mama is in heaven. Where is this promised land? Her body lies between right and wrong, strewn like this. The cypress broke like a minaret, its bounty born of bone. Walls and watchtowers witnessed as hills were torn like this. A one-armed bandit, he played with Tom and jerry cans. Quiet as a ghost, his spirit a stubborn thorn like this. 9 years old, stuffing his mouth with a fistful of strawberries. The red lingers, but he's gone like this. Jacob's ladder once reached to heaven from here. Now he climbs over rubble, weary and worn like this. With blunt blades, these butchers scorn the sacred laws. Cain's curse carries. He's a sacrificial pawn like this. Scrawny drummer boy David, you wield your sling. Born into Bedlam, who taught you to brawn like this? Cartographers conspire with their divide and rulers. Psych, Picot's lines were drawn and redrawn like this. But do you remember Mukhirik, Baghdad's bazaars? It was never, no, I could have sworn, like this. When Moses raised his staff for the righteous, the Red Sea split, washing away Pharaoh like this. Sink into silence, bandage egos, nurse moral wounds. The eggheads crack omelets and you yawn like this. The world's wounds fester, yet you scroll unscathed, retweet. Resistance has been reduced to a form like this. Aflatun says, do something, brother. Whatever you do it quick. Mothers were not meant to mourn like this.
I don't know how you did it because it's something we spoke about in my session in the morning with Sandhya. When there's something like this unraveling in the world, like what's happening in Gaza, I want to express what I'm feeling, but everything feels futile. If I'm not there taking a bullet or ensuring a bomb doesn't blow up a street, what am I achieving writing a poem? I don't know how to do this. I wish I could.
But there's also a feeling of helplessness, right? Can we do more than just write these poems and read them out and discuss them, right? And I feel like in some ways it's disheartening, but in others, there is a sense of the reality that poetry survives and poetry thrives. And it's one of these mediums in ways you can communicate these problems without censorship really being that much of an issue, without governments cracking down upon you, although it obviously has happened to poets all around the world. There was a very moving session with young poets from Gaza, actually. There was an anthology that came out for young students who were writing in Gaza, and they were doing this lovely reading on Zoom. And at some point, one of them was like, the one thing that is keeping us together and keeping us united is the poetry that we're writing. And it feels extremely heartwarming to know that sort of poetry is the one sort of light that seems to be shining and coming through. And there was an interlocutor who very simply asked them sort of, why poetry at your age? You could be reading or playing outside. And their answer is, I can sit safely in my sort of house, not be outside so my parents are not scared and concerned for me. We don't have the internet or TV accessible. The one thing we have is words and ideas. And I found that very moving. And that really kept with me.
That is a very powerful thought because I believe that the people's perspective when things go down anywhere in the world across history can only be found in art because the official documentation, the government records, the books by the state will not have the people's perspective. And at a time like this, it is only poetry or whatever art they can summon with whatever resources they have. This will outlast what is happening and it will indict anyone who was part of a genocide of this sort. It will be poetry. But I don't feel I can write on behalf of a people that's going through that. I feel too helpless.
I feel like the one way that we can indeed engage with this is also the reality that it affects each of us in our own ways, right? It's very difficult to tune into the TV or to read the newspaper and read these issues. And I feel like poetry is also one of those ways in which you can unpack the state of your own mind and the ways in which you approach your own sanity and your own stability. And I feel like your poetry is very good in capturing this sort of chaos that one feels in their mind and how one declutters it and unpacks it.
You're right, because the last poem I want to read literally saved my life. So about 11 years ago, trigger warning, I'm going to be a little honest here, and I'd had enough of it, and I bought a gun, and I had the gun in my mouth. And I felt pointless killing myself. I felt a poem coming up. I got up from there. I thought I'd write that poem as a goodbye note. And when I wrote it, the pulling of that trigger felt futile. So I'm here now, and I'm going to read this poem. And again, quite literally, it's called If I Kill Myself Today. If I kill myself today, tomorrow's milk will curdle untended at the door. Some clothes in the washing machine will stay unwashed forever. 100 ants will gather in quiet celebration around some spilt tea in the kitchen. A desperate doorbell will fall from favor on deaf ears. If I kill myself today, dust will gather where my broom won't be reaching anymore. Ignored, a solitary banana will rot, surrendering itself to flies. A stubborn pigeon will wonder why she's not being chased out the window and gleefully invite some others in. Helplessly, 3 bottles of pills will age past their expiry date, their contents intact. If I kill myself today, a cell phone will beep a reminder at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and every 10 minutes thereafter till its battery dies. A Gmail account will gather unread emails from known IDs for years before spam slowly takes over. A Facebook profile picture will find that it never needs to be updated ever again. But the elections will be held on schedule. The monsoons will come again this year. My aging father will grow even older. The building down the road will be redeveloped. Homes will be furnished. Furniture will be bought, will age and be replaced. The unmarried will get married. The unborn will be birthed. Newspapers will be printed and read and recycled. Tomatoes will be grown. Soup will be made, the kind I was prescribed for a healthier, longer life. You will have it out of a bowl. If you have it next week, you will shed a tear in my memory. It will fall in the soup. You will collect it in a spoonful and swallow it as you choke and break down. If you have it next year, it will be too hot. So you will blow on it till it cools, and then you will swallow it spoonful by spoonful as you sit before the television watching your favorite dinner time soap, cursing the ad breaks with the same intensity as today. If I kill myself today, the telecast timings will not change. We are literally life and death.
I feel like that's as good a note as any to end this session, and as haunting an image as any to end this session.
And if anyone wants to say something, ask something, this is your chance. We have a few minutes. Do we have a mic?
Check.
Hi. Thank you so much for that very candid discussion. I wanted to check, Devashish, at which point in the poem you just read did it change for you? Which line?
I think I had to finish it. I don't know when it happened, but it just went on, and I don't know when it finished, and I don't know how it came out of me. But I mean, if you want detail, I had my laptop open, and I had 10 friends' email IDs punched in, and I was going to paste it there, send it, and go back to the spot under a window where I was going to sit and blow my brains out. And I finished the poem, and just, there was a certain, now when I think about it, there was a lightness, because death didn't seem that potent anymore. It just felt like, what's the point? I mean, I'm going to kill myself, and it's not going to make a difference. But if I'm going to carry on, maybe it's not going to make a difference. So I weigh one against the other. Neither sort of weighs out. Like, I'll stick around.
So what's the point on both sides?
What's the point on both sides?
Thank you.
There's a very haunting line by Yukio Mishima, the Japanese writer, where he says, life is like a line of poetry written in blood. But what I find beautiful about that line is it's a line of poetry. It's not a single word, an idea. You must complete the poem, even if it's written in blood, for that life to be complete. And I feel like that's sort of, in many ways, what your story captures.
Thank you.
One more question?
Thank you so much, you both. Your journey with death, how does it get inspiration or relate to some very epochal work on death, dialogue with death? For example, Yama Nachiketa Sambada, and Sri Aurobindo's epic Savitri. And my related query is that modernity has a cult of immortality. And so it is in that context, a poetry with death requires a kind of a foundational critique of modernity. And in that way, how that poetry today needs to be part of deeper trans-civilizational dialogues.
My immediate reaction to that is I feel like there is a sense, especially among modernity poets, that even those who are living, half-living or living dead, there's a poem in the Penguin Anthology of City Poetry, if I may plug the book, in the sort of introductory chapter, and I can't recollect who the poet is, but it's by an Urdu poet, and the concluding line is, there are corpses rotting in houses paying rent. And I feel like in many ways, that's this sort of idea of where a lot of modernist poets approach life with, where it's a sense of cynicism, but in many ways, to go back to where we began, there's a sense of hope. Don't be a corpse paying rent. Live life to your fullest and have that sense of vitality if you are to live in this modern society, right? Pavanan, who is a fantastic poet as well, has a very good poem. It talks, City of Posters, I think is the name of the poem is. He talks about the sort of city consuming him as he lives through life and sort of is contemplating suicide the entire time. But there's this very beautiful conclusion, the poem, where he's sort of sitting on a park bench watching the city go around him. So in many ways, I feel like even despite modernity and its sort of pressures, there is a reason and a sort of spark that one must find if they wish. I think that's our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, one last question.
It's more an observation than a question. So I saw the whole discussion did address death more than life. And it began with a very personal note referring to families and self, and gradually moved, or maybe suddenly moved to Gaza. And this understanding of death through your poems, both your poems, also led to realize the gaps in between where probably, leading to death, you might be having poems, more poems, that might lead to these kinds of poems. Wish that was also brought in, and it was built up. And if you have, you can say a few words about it.
And no, you're right, because when we read that subject, okay, but I'll just finish this thought because it's a very profound observation, because when we got this subject, the first thing our mind goes to is death, because we are living life, and there's lots of life in this room, but death is conspicuous by its absence. Thought we'd bring death into the room. Thank you.